All right, welcome to our third installment of UMKC Political Science Quickbites, where our expert faculty members discuss hot topics in about the time it takes you to eat a sandwich. I'm Dr. Rebecca Best, and I'll be your host today. Our guest this afternoon is the creator of this series, my colleague, Dr. Deborah Leiter. Dr. Leiter teaches courses in comparative and European politics, and her research has covered such topics as split ticket voting and the effects of third parties on turnout. Today, she joins us to explain what ranked choice voting is, where it's used and why, and what the implications of using it are. So Dr. Leiter, can you start us off by first explaining what is ranked choice voting and how is it different from the plurality voting system that is more familiar to many of us?
Well, hi, Dr. Best. Thank you for the invitation to join you. Ranked choice voting is an electoral system, which really is just the way we take votes and we turn them into seats or offices. I think I'll start with plurality, if that's all right. The plurality system we're familiar with, which I think most of us probably know with the name first past the post, is a system where you divide the country up into districts. Each district has a single seat that the people in that district can elect. And whoever gets the most votes, regardless of how many votes they get, wins. It's a simple system, it's straightforward, and we know, unless there's a tie, exactly who has won basically the day after the election. It's whoever has the most votes. If that's one more vote than the next person, or if it's 100% of the vote. Ranked choice voting is a little different because ranked choice voting is what's called a majority electoral system. So rather than just needing the most votes, you need at least half. So how do you get at least half if you have a lot of people running? Well, the way ranked choice voting works is rather than casting just a single vote, you rank your preferences. So if we were choosing which book in the library behind you, rather than just choosing one, we might have you rank Moby Dick and Pride and Prejudice second, and Jane Eyre third, and so on and so forth until we've ranked all of the possible options. If a candidate gets at least half of the vote, they win. So a lot of times ranked choice voting actually looks just like a plurality vote. Where the ranking comes in is if someone doesn't get at least half. Then the candidate with the fewest first preference votes is eliminated. We act almost like they weren't there in the election. Now we take people's second preference votes and count them and count the votes again. And we do this until one candidate gets a majority. Okay. And that's it. That's ranked choice voting at the end. The big difference is you need at least half. And rather than casting one vote, you're saying first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So ranked choice voting is used in Australia. It's also used right now in Maine and New York, several states, including Kansas, where I am right now, despite the library behind me, have used it for their 2020 Democratic primaries. Why are we seeing a current surge in interest in ranked choice voting in the United States right now?
Well, it's a combination of a number of factors. Part of it is that amongst a large, not huge, but amongst an important part of the population, there's some discontent with things like the party system. The US is considered a two-party system, probably not surprising to most of our viewers, but a lot of countries aren't. A lot of countries have 2, 3, 4, 12, 20, 50 parties. And one reason that we have a two-party system, or that we sort of reinforce it, is our electoral system. Plurality systems have a greater probability of producing a two-party system. So that's one reason. Another one is that we have seen it adopted in cities. And one of the things that's really interesting with federalism in the United States is people really like to learn. So once it was adopted in Oakland in California, it was then adopted in San Francisco in California. People watched these elections work. They said, hey, this works for them. And then voters and citizens pushed to have it adopted in Maine. So part of the reason is there's some discontent with the system. Some of it is institutions are trendy. They ranked choice voting is the next widget in a way. So that's part of the reason. Oh, I think you're muted, Dr. Best.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Some advocates of ranked choice voting argue that past elections would have turned out differently under ranked choice than they did under plurality. For example, Don Sari argues that Al Gore might have carried Florida in 2000 under ranked choice voting. That could have changed the outcome of a very tight election. So what types of effects would we actually expect to see if ranked choice voting were adopted for presidential elections in the United States? Would this produce different outcomes? Would we see different incentive structures for third-party candidates deciding whether to enter a race or to stay out, or to stay in once they're in? And is there a potential?
Oh, so sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. And is there a potential, finally, for parties to try to game the system by encouraging third-party runs, things like that?
Yeah, so I think you've hit your hammer right on the head of the nail of one of the places where we would see some differences in ranked choice voting, and that's in close or competitive elections. If an election is a blowout, if an election has candidates getting above half of the vote, there is no difference between ranked choice voting and plurality systems. And I think that's worth noting because for the vast majority of Americans, they actually are casting a vote in a non-competitive election. But there are competitive elections in the United States, and that's where we can see a difference. So let's take an example that happened recently in Maine for, I believe it was the House of Representatives. The election was essentially close to a tie. It was about 48% for one candidate. So that's the plurality winner. 47% for the other candidate. And then third-party candidates and independents picked up the rest. Under a plurality system, that first candidate who got 48% would win. And that's a common experience in Maine that has a really strong history of sort of independents or third parties running. But because Maine had just adopted ranked choice voting, the second place candidate won because she really ended up picking up pretty much all of the votes from those third party and independent candidate voters. Wow. And I think that's really the essence of the difference between ranked choice voting and plurality votes is what kind of a system do you want? Do you want a system where one person wins when they have the most votes, even if that means that more people than not voted for someone else? Or do you want someone who's everyone's second or third choice winning, even if they aren't a lot of people's first preference? Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, the essence of the difference between the two. So absolutely, one of the key things that ranked choice voting does is eliminate what are called spoiler candidates. And I think that's why people point to the year 2000. Potentially, Nader took some votes from Al Gore, and potentially Buchanan took some votes from George W. Bush. So depending on how those third-party candidates split, in an election that's nearly tied, those small amount of differences might matter. Now, what about third-party candidates, right? We say one of the things that we know is that majority systems allow a third party to compete. And some of it has to do with, I think something you alluded to, which was strategic voting. So I go into an election, let's say in the United States, I'm a Green Party supporter, for example. Or we can go up to Canada if we want to choose an American example, or a non-American example. I'm a Green Party supporter. I really like them, but they've never won in my district. And I know they have, I don't know, 5% of the vote, 10%, or even 20 or 30. They're not going to win. So I'm going to choose a candidate that I don't like as well, but I think has a chance of winning to avoid what might be my least preferred option. With ranked choice voting, you don't have to do that. With ranked choice voting, I can still vote rank the Green Party first. And then if they don't win, I still sort of have a chance of not wasting my vote. If enough people do that, then that third party has a greater chance of winning than they would under a plurality system. But it does still require, and I think this is really key to understand, whenever you have a single winner system, whenever there's one winner per district, you still need a lot of votes to win. So this isn't going to get parties with 5 to 10% chance of winning. It's going to get parties with 20 or 30% of the vote a chance to win. And that's really key to understand. We're not going to see dozens of parties under ranked choice voting. We'll see 3 or 4 or 5.
Right.
Let's see. I'm missing some parts of your question. Would you mind?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually wondered if there is a potential for larger parties to try to pick up votes under a ranked choice system by encouraging little tiny non-viable parties to run, with the idea that they're non-viable. It doesn't matter if people vote for them first. We want those voters second and third choices.
Yes. So there's actually a great story from Australia in one of the Australian states a few years back. I don't remember which one, where the large party on the left, the Labour Party, like most parties, sent flyers to voters recommending how to vote. This is really key. It's one of the things we see in a lot of alternative voting systems, ranked choice vote. Ranked choice voting, interestingly enough, has about 5 different names. Ranked choice voting is what the American public calls it. So what they recommended was themselves first, of course, but they didn't recommend the next largest party. They didn't even recommend the next largest party after that on the left. They recommended a teeny tiny party. I think it was the Animal Rights Party in Australia, which I think would probably get 2 or 3% of the vote. Because what they wanted was their rival sort of second place left party to come in third.
Right.
And so parties absolutely don't even have to game the system by getting small candidates to run. Small candidates will run on their own, but they can instruct their voters to vote in strategic ways.
Right.
There's really nothing stronger than an electoral system in creating incentives. And there's nobody better than political parties at figuring out that system and how it benefits them.
Of course.
Right. They're champions at it.
Very, very cool example there. Yeah, you want to be the second choice on the next party closest to you, but you don't want to risk losing out to that party by being their second choice.
Exactly right. Yes. I mean, imagine an election that's 33% across 3 candidates. 1 vote is enough to make a difference and cause you to lose and someone else to win. So that's always going to happen with single winner systems. And so some of the things that you'll hear promised about ranked choice voting, this is some of the reasons that we don't always see empirical evidence for it, like the idea that it causes moderates to win always. It doesn't always, right? If there's small differences between, say, an extreme right and a moderate right, or an extreme left and a moderate left candidate, small differences can move it to the extremes pretty easily.
Yeah.
Or, right, the other thing you'll hear is, one of the arguments is that it causes parties to be nicer to each other, or candidates to be nicer to each other. Because if I'm a big fan of the Democrats, I'm not going to want to hear the Green Party, the Libertarian Party bash them, right? I'm not going to rank them high.
Sure.
But I still need you to rank me high. So you can only, this logic only extends so far, and we don't see a lot of great empirical evidence to really show that it really softens rhetoric all that much. Ask our friends in Australia.
Sure. And that makes a certain amount of sense. On the one hand, I can see that argument, though, if you're mean to my party, then I'm not going to want to rank you high. But on the other hand, well, what are my alternatives? Am I really going to just, if I'm on the left, am I really going to go for a right party over another left? Interesting. Okay. Thank you. All right. So as there is this increased interest right now in the United States in ranked choice voting, what do you think are the prospects for an expansion in where we see ranked choice voting in the United States? And could this lead to a change in the party system in the United States? Certainly we have third parties and they run, but they're rarely viable in races, or their candidates are rarely viable. Do you foresee a shift in that? And do you think there might be, and you've already partially answered this question, But do you think there's any reason at all to hope that ranked choice voting could be an effective way of countering the increasing polarization in American politics, or that it might lead, for example, to different types of candidates, a more diverse candidate pool in terms of demographic factors like gender, and would we see more minority candidates?
Yeah, so institutions are always slow to change. That is one of the great things and terrible things about institutions. But the United States, because there's so much federalism, because there's so many decisions made at a local level, there are a lot of places where ranked choice voting can emerge. And in fact, that's been the story in the United States, is it's been cities that have adopted it and have been the ones that have been most willing to sort of experiment with their rules. So I expect if we see an increase in ranked choice voting, first it's going to start at a local level in cities, for city council, for mayor, for certain types of executives, and that as it's successful in those cities, we might see a demand grow in states. That's the story that Maine had. However, there's a key caveat about why Maine is the state to have adopted ranked choice voting statewide, and it is because they use direct democracy at a high rate. One of the things that makes electoral reform more likely is direct democracy, because if you are currently winning under a set of rules, you may not be particularly eager to change them. So state legislators who are winning under a current set of rules may not be particularly excited to change them or willing to do so, may not face that risk. So states that use direct democracy are probably going to be the ones where we're more likely to see it. And in fact, the interest groups in the United States that have sort of been pushing ranked choice voting have certainly been targeting those types of states. So there's always a possibility. The ranked choice voting seems to be fairly stable in Maine, but it is not uncontroversial. So it does take some time for these things to grow, and people who were consistently winning under the old system and are less consistently winning now are going to push to reform back. This is a common story of electoral system reform. New Zealand changed its electoral system in 1993 after years and years and years of discontent. And then I think it was just 13 years later, they held another referendum on that electoral system because some people had become discontented with the new system. They ended up keeping it, but I think that's worth noting. So ranked choice voting is going to probably be a local and state up-based phenomena. Can it cure polarization? Well, that's a big question. And part of the reason that's a big question is polarization in the United States doesn't have a single cause. There are a lot of things that contribute to it that we know can't explain everything. For example, you'll hear gerrymandering affects polarization. But the problem with that is that the Senate is polarized and there's no gerrymandering of states. You'll hear that primaries lead to polarization, but the problem is we've had primaries for basically all of the 20th century. Does SMDP lead to polarization? It's kind of hard to say. In fact, to the extent that we have any predictions, we often predict that two parties should converge under plurality, that they should all be competing for where the most voters are.
And SMDP, of course.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, first past the post. Yeah. Sorry, I switched into political science there. Thank you, Dr. Best. I think all electoral systems maybe have too many names. This might be a trend we need to fix. But yes, a single plurality is the same thing as first past the post. So will it help? The answer is it might have an effect. Certainly it will encourage independents and third-party candidates to run at a higher rate, even if it doesn't necessarily lead to their success. Mm-hmm. And in increasing the number of third-party candidates running, parties on the right and left might consider converging to squeeze them out, but they might also do the reverse. They might move outward to take their votes away from them. So I would say that there's reason to be concerned about a direct link between AV and a reduction of, or excuse me, ranked choice voting and a reduction of polarization.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Now, I know that you have this coming fall, you have a brand new course lined up. In our last couple of minutes, Would you mind telling us about that?
Yeah, so one of the new classes that we are offering in political science this fall is on women in politics. And in fact, this reminds me of a part of your question I didn't answer, which was
Right.
the effect of electoral systems on variation representation. And in fact, we do know that electoral systems matter, that certain types of electoral systems do increase, or at least increase the probability of electing female and minority candidates. The records with majority systems are somewhat mixed, right? The problem is anytime you have just a single winner, it's always going to be harder for the non-traditional candidate to win. So could AV help? It certainly might. Ranked choice voting help? It certainly might. I called it alternative vote for years before ranked choice voting got trendy. Sorry, everyone. So one of the things we're going to be investigating in women in politics are what are the systematic reasons that we see women elected at lower rates under certain systems. And I think we'll certainly talk about these types of electoral system reforms and their probability of affecting the chance of different candidates winning. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds like it. All right, everybody. Well, now you know where you can hear more about how these different electoral systems affect representation of women. And hopefully you have, over your lunch break, picked up some new facts, new information. Thank you, Dr. Leiter.
Thank you, Dr. Best. I really enjoyed it. And yes, can't wait to hear the next Quick Bites.
All right.
All right.
Well, see you next time.
Bye, everyone.